Welcome, dear listeners, to tonight's sleep story, Silverfrost and the Sleeping Gardens. If you're looking to settle into a peaceful state before you begin to drift off to sleep, then I invite you to join me as we start with a short breathing guidance before the story itself. You can, however, skip ahead to the story if you prefer. The chapter timestamps are provided in the description below. In this tranquil tale, we will follow a young girl named Lyra as she embarks on a journey to the mythical sleeping gardens atop the snow-covered Mount Cinderpeak, seeking to restore calm to the enchanted, slumbering plants. Let's begin by finding a comfortable position. Allow your body to relax into your bed, allowing your mind to slow down. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, feeling the air fill your lungs completely, and then release the breath slowly through your mouth, like a gentle sigh of relief. Allow your shoulders to soften as you do so, and allow your body to become more heavy as you breathe out. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, sinking further and further into relaxation. As you take each breath, imagine that you are standing at the base of Mount Cinderpeak, observing the delicate patterns of silver frost on the leaves of the surrounding plants. With every inhale, imagine you are taking in the crisp mountain air, and with each exhale, you are releasing any tension or worry you may be carrying. Allow yourself to drift into the slow and deliberate pace of the world around you, letting go of any need to rush or move too quickly, simply allowing yourself to be still and present, breathing in and out. If any thoughts arise, simply acknowledge them and let them pass like gentle clouds in the sky, slowly drifting away with the wind. Then, gently return your attention to your breathing or to the soft sound of my voice. There's nothing to do now. Simply relax and allow the story to carry you away into a peaceful rest and hopefully into a gentle and calming sleep. Chapter 1. Whispers of the Awakening. The small cottage, nestled at the base of Mount Cinderpeak, was always filled with a quiet sort of magic. Lyra, with her soft hands and even softer voice, moved through the garden with an almost ethereal grace. It was a cool morning, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. The mountain loomed above, its snowy peaks touching the pale, early morning sky, but down here it felt like a sanctuary, a world away. She could feel the silver frost on the edges of the leaves. It looked like the most delicate, intricate lace, created to protect each plant from the cold. Each leaf was tinged with silver frost, so delicate it appeared 1,000 tiny diamonds had been sprinkled across every surface. This morning, though, was different. The usually content rustle of the plants was tinged with a faint unrest. Lyra gently touched the leaves of a moon petal, the velvety texture cool against her skin, noticing a slight tremor. Usually they sat as still as the mountain tops, each petal a perfect crescent, but this morning she saw a faint, almost imperceptible shaking. It wasn't a frantic movement, but more like a slight shift in the balance. It was almost like a sigh, a gentle unease in their deep, verdant being. Her fingers, covered in dirt, brushed over another plant, a nightshade, and the same faint vibration tingled through her skin. This was unusual. Lyra always listened to her plants, more so than most. It wasn't something everyone could do, she'd come to realise. This ability to feel their moods as if they were her own. It was a gentle hum beneath the surface, an unspoken language of shared breaths and silent knowing. Today, however, it was different, more complex than it usually was. It was as though the garden were filled with whispers, faint and far off, like a melody struggling to emerge from a deep sleep. She closed her eyes and took a deep, slow breath. The earthy scent of the garden seemed to deepen, a comfort to her in this change. She focused, letting the whispers become more distinct. They spoke, it seemed, of a place far away, high above, on the mountain top. That was when she remembered the stories that Elder Rowan told, stories of the sleeping gardens nestled at the peak of Cinderpeak, a mythical place of perpetual peace, where magical plants slept in an eternal, tranquil slumber. The gardens were covered in silverfrost, a powerful substance that allowed everything to remain still and calm. He'd always spoken of it in hushed tones, with a look of reverence in his aged eyes. In his stories, they were a beacon of serenity, the very opposite of the restless stirrings that she felt today. She remembered the cadence of his voice as he spoke of it, a gentle and methodical rhythm. Lyra moved to the cottage, her small home, built from stone and warmed by a wood fire. She sat by the hearth, the fire crackling gently, each pop and hiss a comforting lullaby. The scent of wood smoke filled the room, mixing with the subtle earthy aroma of her dried herbs hanging from the rafters. She pulled an old, leather-bound book from the shelf, the one filled with the myths and legends of their mountains. As she ran her fingers over its worn cover, she remembered Elder Rowan explaining the ancient magic that maintained the garden's slumber, a complex weaving of plant life and song. She found the passage, its words written in faded ink, describing the dream weaver, an enormous tree at the centre of the garden, its heart the source of all its magic. The passage spoke of a song, an ancient lullaby that ensured the garden's rest, a lullaby that was said to have been sung for centuries, each note weaving a web of peace and tranquility. But the last line sent a faint chill through her. It spoke of the dangers of an awakening, the destructive forces that could be unleashed if that song were to cease, a thought that felt wrong. This place of peace as it began to stir. She closed the book slowly, taking another deep breath, the smoke from the fire curling into the air around her. She realised the source of the whispers. It was the sleeping gardens, calling to her from the mountain peak. Its plants no longer at peace. She knew, with a deep sense of certainty, she had to go there. The responsibility to ensure the safety of the mountain sat heavily in her heart. It was not a desire, but an understanding. She would go to the sleeping gardens, no matter what the cost. To make sure the plants were no longer in unrest was now her calling. She felt an immense calm settle within her. She knew with every fibre of her being she must go, not because she felt fear, but because she could feel their call. The whisper from the plants was now a soft lullaby, lulling her into its gentle, sleepy grasp. She knew her path, and the thought allowed her a sense of clarity and inner peace. The garden was relying on her as the plants leaned and turned toward her like they had so many times before. She was ready for her quest, in whatever form it may take. Tomorrow, she would begin her ascent of Mount Cinderpeak. The soft wind rustling the trees outside almost seemed to be cheering her on, a gentle wave of momentum moving in her direction. She laid back, closed her eyes, and let the rhythm of the forest lull her to sleep, ready for her journey the next day. Chapter 2. The Ascent of Cinderpeak. The first light of dawn painted the snow-capped peaks of Mount Cinderpeak with a soft rosy hue as Lyra began her ascent. The air was crisp and cold, each breath forming a small cloud before her face. Her steps were measured and steady, her boots crunching softly on the freshly fallen snow. She wore a warm cloak, the fur trim brushing against her face. The small garden she had nurtured was far behind her now, a soft, muted splash of green against the white backdrop of the foothills. She felt a slight pang of sorrow as she looked back, yet it was soon overcome with the task ahead. She took a slow breath and looked forward toward the mountain. It seemed impossibly high, yet there was something about it that was drawing her towards it, one step at a time. She followed a winding path that was barely visible beneath the snow. The trees around her tall and silent, their branches laden with snow. Each tree seemed to offer a silent observation, watching as she passed, making her feel less alone on this solitary journey. The gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and frost, creating a soothing backdrop to her steady climb. She moved forwards with purpose, each footstep a slow, deliberate motion. She allowed her mind to be at peace, focusing solely on the path beneath her feet and the rhythm of her own breathing. She felt the presence of the mountain all around her, a looming entity that was strangely comforting. As the sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and the mountain began to reveal more of its rugged beauty. Lyra passed frozen streams, their surfaces reflecting the pale blue sky above. The sound of the melting snow trickled softly, a gentle melody accompanying her steps. She observed the small, intricate details around her. She admired a lone, silverfrost-touched flower tucked away under the snow. It seemed almost out of place, so delicate and fragile in such a harsh environment. She felt its presence. She could feel the calm that it emanated as she passed, and took a moment to appreciate its beauty, taking another deep breath in. Later in the day, she came across a small clearing, and she saw him instantly. He was seated upon a log, his back to her, methodically grinding herbs using a pestle and mortar. His movements were slow, almost ceremonial, like a silent ritual passed down through generations. She paused, observing him, her steps completely still. He had the air of the mountain about him, ancient and weathered, as though he had been there since the very beginning. Lyra noticed he had a small garden next to him, filled with strange and unique plants, all touched with the same delicate silver frost as her own home garden. He could have been waiting there all day, slowly and silently taking care of his herbs. Lyra moved forward slightly, and the sound of her footsteps broke the silence. He turned, his gaze sharp and piercing, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that put her at ease. He had a long, white beard, and his hands were gnarled with age, like the roots of an old tree. "You are Lyra," he said, his voice a low rumble, like the distant roll of thunder. "I have been expecting you." His words were not a surprise to Lyra. She felt like this meeting was always a part of the path she was meant to take. He had an air of knowledge about him that was undeniable. Lyra nodded, acknowledging his greeting, and moved forward to sit with him by the log, taking a small breath in. "You know of the Sleeping Gardens, don't you?" she said, her voice soft, mirroring the calmness of the forest. He nodded in return. "I am Bramble," he replied, setting down the mortar and pestle. "I have been tending the mountainside for longer than I can remember." He moved the tools out of the way and gestured to the log next to him. He too looked up at the mountain in front of them. His movements were slow and deliberate, each one with purpose and intention. "I felt the disturbance," Bramble continued, his voice soft and yet grave. "The song has begun, it seems, and the gardens have begun to stir in their sleep. It is no longer safe up there." Lyra nodded again, her understanding deep and true. "I am going there," she stated. "I can feel their unrest. I must do what I can to return them to peace." A gentle, unwavering hope in her eyes. She hadn't asked for help, but Bramble already felt he knew her intentions. He felt the peace and serenity that she emanated. Bramble stood slowly, his aged frame a testament to the mountain's enduring strength, and gestured towards the path once more. "Then we must go," he said. "The journey is long, and the way is difficult, but we shall face it together." He began moving toward the path, his movements slow and measured. They started the climb in tandem, both of them at ease with the silence they shared. It was a silent understanding between them of the path ahead. He felt she would be able to keep him in check. They set off, their boots crunching on the soft snow, the sound of a soothing rhythm accompanying their climb. The sun continued its slow path across the sky, casting long shadows behind them as they ascended. The air grew colder, but a shared purpose warmed them. Lyra felt an overwhelming sense of calm, surrounded by the slow pace of the mountain and the steady presence of Bramble. She knew with all her heart she was on the right path, walking towards a deep and calming destiny that she must face. Chapter 3. The Chime of the Crystal Caves. The path twisted and turned as Lyra and Bramble continued their climb up Mount Cinderpeak. The trees grew sparser, replaced by jagged rocks and patches of ice. The air was colder, and the wind, although gentle, carried a sharper edge, each gust seeming to whisper secrets of the mountain. The sun began to set in the distance, painting the snowy landscape with hues of orange and purple. Lyra walked with a steady rhythm, focusing on the path ahead, and following Bramble's slow, deliberate lead. The repetitive sound of their boots crunching on the snow, and the light wind passing over them, became a kind of soothing lullaby. As the twilight deepened, they reached the entrance to a cave, hidden behind a curtain of frozen waterfalls. The ice shimmered with a soft, pale light, like thousands of tiny diamonds embedded within the rock. Bramble paused before the opening, his hand resting on a piece of jagged rock as he turned back toward Lyra. "This is the path," he stated, his voice low, the way through the crystal caves. "But be warned, the song is stronger within their depths." Lyra nodded, acknowledging his words, her eyes drawn towards the cave. There was an eerie beauty about it that seemed to call to her, despite the warning. They moved into the darkness, the path winding through narrow passages. The cave walls walls were lined with crystals of varying shapes and sizes, each one reflecting the soft light of their lanterns. The crystals began to hum as they moved forward, a gentle, resonant sound that echoed through the caves, yet the sound was beginning to stir more, slowly growing in strength and pitch, the hum becoming more of a song as they progressed. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing inward. The song, she realized, was resonating within the crystals, amplifying its power. She could almost feel it, an uneasy stirring within her own body. The sound grew stronger, the hum becoming more insistent as they went deeper into the cave. It was a melody that seemed to vibrate through her very being, its notes echoing throughout her body. She felt as though the crystals were singing in response to the song, growing louder and more discordant as they moved along the path. Bramble kept a steady pace, his gaze focused on the path in front of them. The walls of the cave narrowed, as though the space was becoming smaller and more intense, surrounding them in a cacophony of noise. She felt a sense of unease as she began to feel the lack of inner peace the caves emitted. Lyra stopped, placing a hand on the crystal wall, feeling its strange vibrations, her other hand still holding the lantern, the light of which danced across the surface. She tried to soothe it, speaking to the crystal with a slow, deliberate hum. The sound she made was meant to resonate with the cave, a calming counterpart to the rising disharmony. However, the cave did not respond to her soothing nature. The sounds it made only increased and became more fragmented as she tried, amplifying the unease, making it difficult to even hold on to the calm within her. Her hand rested on its surface like a calming presence, yet the hum within the crystals only grew more complex. Bramble turned to her, a look of concern in his aged eyes. "The song is stronger here," he said, his voice almost drowned out by the cacophony. "It's disrupting the harmony of the crystals." Lyra knew that it was not only the crystals, but she herself that was also being affected by the song. The calming pace that she was holding on to so dearly was slowly beginning to break apart, and she struggled to pull it back in. She took another slow breath. It would not help to allow her inner peace to be eroded. She must find a way to soothe the song and not allow herself to be pulled into its disharmony. She tried again, this time slowing her breathing, her gaze focused on the crystalline surface. She tried to resonate with their deep, underlying calm, attempting to bring the inner peace of the sleeping garden into the crystal cave, but the song was too powerful. The crystals vibrated with an increasingly restless energy, their hum growing louder, creating an atmosphere of discord and tension. The cave became too overwhelming, like they had somehow entered the song itself and found themselves trapped within it. Bramble placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "We must move on," he said, his gaze full of wisdom. "We cannot soothe the crystals here. We must reach the heart of the gardens. That is the only place we can begin to try." He knew that they could not stay in the cave any longer. He pulled Lyra forward, his touch calm and methodical, as they began to move forward out of the crystal cave into the cold of the night. Chapter 4: Heart of the Sleeping Garden. Leaving the chaotic resonance of the crystal caves behind, Lyra and Bramble emerged into the crisp night air. The moon hung high above, casting a silvery glow on the snow-covered landscape. wind had died down, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. They stood at the edge of the tree line, the path ahead leading towards the peak of Mount Cinderpeak. The air was colder, yet strangely calming, as though the chaotic song that they had experienced in the caves had been left behind, for now. The final stretch of the ascent was steep and challenging, the path winding through deep snowdrifts and rocky outcrops. They walked in silence, their footsteps the only sound to break the stillness of the night. The gentle glow of their lanterns illuminated the path in front of them, creating a soft ball of light that moved slowly with them, like a gentle guide. Lyra focused on the rhythm of her own breath, each inhale and exhale a reminder to remain calm, despite the trials they had experienced. The repetitive nature of each step forward helped her to regain the sense of peace that she had lost within the caves. As they climbed higher, the trees became more sparse, and the first signs of the sleeping gardens appeared. Patches of unique, mythical plants peeked out from beneath the snow, their petals tinged with the same silver frost that Lyra had seen in her own garden, and within the crystal caves. These plants, however, were different. Their leaves were moving in erratic patterns, and their growth seemed uncontrolled, almost as though they were dancing to the tune of a discordant song. The once tranquil garden was now in chaos, swaying to a rhythm that was entirely out of step with its natural, sleepy nature. They reached a clearing, and the full extent of the sleeping gardens was revealed. The space was bathed in the pale moonlight, creating an ethereal scene. The snow lay scattered, and the plants were in full bloom, swaying and writhing in an agitated dance. The gentle rustling of leaves that was usually present had turned into a symphony of rustling and chaotic movement. There was no sense of tranquility here, only a feeling of restlessness and unease, which now felt even more apparent after the quiet of the trek. The air hung heavy, filled with the faint melody of the song, still carrying the same discordant rhythm that they had experienced in the crystal caves. In the centre of the garden, towering above all the other plants, stood the Dreamweaver, the ancient tree that held the heart of the garden. Its branches, usually still and serene, now swayed erratically, and its leaves pulsed with a strange, unsettling energy. The leaves seemed to be crying out with their restless movements, almost as though begging to return to the quiet slumber they had once known. Its presence was imposing, yet there was a sense of calm underneath it, like the centre of a storm. Lyra moved towards it, drawn to the source of the song, her gaze fixed on the Dreamweaver. The ground beneath her feet was soft, and the plants seemed to part as she moved, almost as if they were acknowledging her presence. She took slow, deliberate steps forward, her hand brushing against the swaying leaves. Bramble followed closely behind, his steps more cautious, his eyes fixed on the restless plants all around. His presence was a calming factor, and his steady gaze kept Lyra grounded in the task at hand. As she drew closer to the Dreamweaver, the melody grew stronger, and Lyra felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Despite the chaos surrounding it, she had to stay calm for this, to maintain the inner peace she had worked so hard to regain. She found a spot beneath its roots and sat cross-legged on the soft earth. She took a slow breath, her gaze soft and steady as she looked up toward the sky. trying to maintain her balance and focus. Bramble joined her, sitting beside her, his presence a gentle anchor in the chaotic scene. They sat in silence for a while, observing the Dreamweaver, listening to the song that seemed to emanate from its very core. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on her breath, drawing in the peace that was just beneath the surface of the garden's unrest. She knew what she had to do now. Chapter 5. The Song of Slumber. Lyra sat beneath the Dreamweaver, her gaze fixed on the ancient tree. The chaotic melody pulsed through the garden, each note a wave of restless energy that seemed to move through her body, attempting to disrupt her calm. She closed her eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath, focusing on the subtle rhythm within her, a quiet counterpoint to the discord around her. She felt the soft, cool earth beneath her, grounding her, connecting her to the heart of the garden. Bramble sat beside her, his presence a silent, calming force, allowing Lyra to hold onto the last vestiges of peace. She could feel the Dreamweaver, its ancient spirit a mix of longing and unrest. She realized the song was not meant to cause chaos, but to express the tree's deep desire for peace, its yearning to return to its tranquil slumber. The song was not a cry for help, but rather an ancient sigh of tiredness. She understood now that the garden had been forced into stillness for too long, and its desire for rest had become a turbulent cry. Lyra began to hum, her voice soft and gentle, a slow, calming melody that rose into the chaos. She was not trying to drown out the discordant tune of the garden, but rather to intertwine with it, like a gentle stream merging with a troubled sea. Her melody was simple and slow, repeating a single phrase that evoked a sense of peaceful acceptance, a lullaby of quiet surrender. Each note was intended to bring calm to the disturbed garden. As she hummed, the plants around them seemed to sway less frantically. The movements, although still present, were becoming more fluid, less jarring, like a gentle dance under the moonlight. She felt the roots of the Dreamweaver responding to her song, a sense of warmth spreading from its ancient heart into her own. The leaves moved gently, as though they were listening and responding in kind. She focused solely on the feeling of the song, letting it move through her with each and every hum. Bramble watched her with a look of quiet reverence, his gaze fixed on Lyra's face, her features illuminated by the soft moonlight. He felt the shift in the air, the chaotic energy of the garden beginning to mellow, returning to the gentle rhythm of its natural state. He could see the deep connection between the young girl and the ancient tree, a silent understanding passing between them. He felt the calm returning to his own heart with each note Lyra hummed. The fear that he had carried all day had begun to subside. Lyra continued her song, her voice becoming stronger, more assured. The melody was now weaving into the discordant notes of the Dreamweaver's song, creating a tapestry of harmonious sound that echoed through the sleeping garden. She felt a sense of deep calm and peaceful understanding with each breath she took. Her body relaxed as she allowed the song to guide her into this state. She began to relax her shoulders, her jaw and her hands. Each breath in seemed to bring more peace with it. The plants moved slowly now, their leaves swaying gently in a soft, hypnotic rhythm. The silverfrost, still present on every leaf and petal, glistened under the moonlight. It shone with a quiet and subtle light. The chaotic song was slowly transforming, becoming softer, more melancholic, and his energy was beginning to calm, finally returning the quiet that it had so desperately sought. The garden began to appear in its truest and most peaceful state, ready to drift off into a peaceful slumber. As the last notes of her song faded into the quiet of the night, Lyra felt a sense of deep peace wash over her. The dream weaver stood tall and still, its branches no longer swaying erratically, its leaves a peaceful, deep green. The sleeping garden had finally found its way back to its eternal slumber. She took one final breath in and allowed it out slowly, her body relaxing deeper into the earth. She laid back slowly onto the soft earth and watched the stars as they began to shine above her. She was at peace with the journey, and she was at peace with herself. Lyra closed her eyes, the gentle rhythm of the garden lulling her into a deep, restful sleep. Bramble watched her for a while, a soft smile on his face, before drifting into his own peaceful slumber. The sleeping gardens were finally at rest, and the mountain was once again at peace.